This episode of How and Why with DTI is brought to you by the Doheny Parts Force. With over 300,000 parts, tools, and accessories in stock, the Doheny Parts Force is available where and when you need us. Need sewer hose? Not to worry. All of our 15 coast-to-coast locations has Piranha sewer hose in stock ready to go. When you need parts, thank the Doheny Parts Force. Welcome back to another episode of How and Why with DTI. I'm your host, Mike Renner, and today I'll have alongside me Ed Fitzgerald. Today's topic is understanding sewer hose. Let's talk a little bit about thermoplastic hose that we use on sewer cleaners and how it's put together and how it's manufactured.
You basically have three components to a piece of sewer cleaning hose. The inner liner, which is smooth and reduces friction, so we have minimal pressure loss sending the fluid, and there will be some pressure loss. You have the white nylon braid that gives strength to that inner liner because that inner liner can't hold the 2,500, 3,000 PSI pressure. So the braid needs to be put onto the inner liner for strength purposes. Then the cover on the outside of the hose is installed on there for wear. We could take a inner liner with nylon braid on it, set it down on the table here and run pressure through it all day long, it'd be fine. We insist on dragging this hose over sharp edges all the time and making pretty severe bends in it to get it in and out of the pipe. So that sewer hose needs a protection on the outside as a wear factor, something for it to wear off.
So that's a little bit about the construction of this, and you hear it called thermoplastic hose, and that's because the inner material is made out of thermoplastic, and that's that smooth inner liner to help reduce friction. And that's where that name comes from, just to give you guys a little bit behind that. Now that we talked about how it's made, this hose has a lot of information on it, even if there's no writing.
Correct.
You can tell a lot about a hose by a few different things. And the first one is the outside hose collar. And Ed, when we talk about outside hose collar, when you, being a seasoned veteran like you are, when you look at this hose, you can exactly tell what from the outside collar.
I can tell the pressure rating of this hose. When you start looking at jetter hose, the orange represents a 2,500 PSI operating pressure. Not burst pressure, but operating. And burst pressure is historically 2 to 3 times that number. You, in the past, have seen yellow hose. That's 2,000 PSI. You don't see a lot of that anymore. Not a lot of it being made, and it's expensive to make because it's short run. So they've replaced the 2,000 PSI yellow hose with orange hose. We just put a little higher pressure rating on it. You might see this in blue, which is 3,000 PSI. You might see in green, usually found on the small trailer jets. Yeah. The green is 4,000 and red is 5,000 PSI. Again, historically found on the smaller trailer jetters where we're running higher pressures. But the outside color represents the operating pressure that the hose is designed to operate at.
Yeah. And what we see a lot of in a lot of the applications where, you know, especially truck mounted equipment, you see a lot of the orange is mainly probably 80% roughly.
Yeah, 80, 90%.
Maybe a little higher, but then you see some blue in the orange too. So, or in the sewer cleaning, blue is 3,000 PSI.
3,000. You're starting to see a few more blue trucks because the equipment's coming out at 70 gallons a minute at 3,000 PSI now, rather than 80 at
2,500. Yep.
So you're starting to see a little more of that out there today, a little higher pressures.
Yeah. So you'll see a lot of orange, but seeing that orange hose automatically, no matter who manufactures it, you can tell what the operating pressure is, and that's a key thing you
just
can get
by looking at the outside color.
The next thing that you can learn from looking at this hose is the inside collar actually represents a lot too. So the inside collar is who manufactures this hose. And that's extremely important because each manufacturer has their own specifications for hose. So whether it's Aeroquip or Piranha, their specifications could be a little bit different between the two. And you need a really solid swedge when you're trying to mend this hose. You don't want any room for error in that. So making sure you understand who the inside color represents, that lets you know what dies and mends to get to make sure it has a solid swedge in there. So if you look at these hoses, we have blue Aeroquip, we have a yellow for Piranha. You may see a green or a red for Imperial Eastman. There's also a white, a cream, a dark gray. There's a bunch of different colors. And the main thing that you need to understand in there is that's the manufacturer, and you need to make sure the dyes you get and the fittings you get match the manufacturer color. And generally, they'll put a line around them, as we have in some examples here, yellow and blue, so you know right off the way there's a visual cue that you're using the right thing.
Mike,
right.
let me have that end fitting right there.
Yep.
And for those of you that aren't listening to this on video and it's audio, yeah, video, and you can see the difference in those two fittings.
Yeah, there's a substantial difference. I mean, it's not substantial in size, but it's substantial enough to cause a swedge not to take.
Wrong dies, wrong fittings.
Yes.
This fitting can blow off the end of the hose.
Or worse, it can blow up in the wrong situation where there's a human next to it.
Yes. Last thing we want to do is hurt somebody.
Yeah, this is all about safety. This hose can be one of the most dangerous things on a piece of equipment, and we want to make sure that you're always looking out for hose and what you have. And when it comes to that, Ed, these hoses, because they're in a volatile situation, they get damaged a lot, and we want to let you know kind of what we can do to understand the damage that it takes and how we can lessen that.
Yes.
So when we talk about damage, there's a lot of ways that this can get damaged, and some of it can be wear and tear over time, but there's also specific things we can do to lessen the damage over time for this hose.
The tiger tail in the bottom of the manhole, some people still like to use rollers, so it's a little bit old school, but it's a lot less abusive on the hose than a tiger tail is. It's just more expensive. What you're trying to do is when this hose goes over the sharp edge of a piece of pipe, as you're lowered into the manhole and it turns into the pipe, the edge of that pipe is super sharp, razor sharp, and it could destroy a piece of hose in about a heartbeat. What you want to do is use a tiger tail, which is basically a tube that goes over top of the hose, and the hose rides inside the tube rather than riding on the wall of the pipe.
Well, a tiger tail is basically it's a sacrificial piece. It takes the damage and it keeps it off the hose.
Yeah. We see rollers being used down there like we use on the camera trucks. On the top of the manhole, we have a device called a top manhole roller. It's a roller so the hose has something smooth to go over. We use the orange manhole rigs today. Something smooth for the hose to go over. So you're not tearing the cover off the outside of the hose. You start looking at jetter hose and you're $3 to $4 a foot. It can get really expensive to start replacing jetter hose. If it's protected, you're gonna get some good service life out of it.
And no matter whether you use a roller, a tiger tail, what you're using, the main function there is to make sure that you're not dragging this over the sharp edges of corners. That's really what we're trying to do there, because we see a lot of damage done by that. Some other forms of damage can be getting the nozzle stuck and trying to pull it out. Ed, talk about that a little bit.
Well, anybody that's run a sewer cleaner stuck a nozzle in a pipe.
That is true.
That's a pretty much given. You're gonna, if you haven't done it yet, you will. What I see happen most frequently is the nozzle gets stuck in the pipe, and you pull and you pull and you pull and you pull, and then you start trying different methods to try to get it out of the pipe. And you shut the water off and try to pull the hose back, and you stretch the hose out pretty severely. I mean, sometimes half this diameter when you stretch it out. When you do that, the bonding or glue that's between the inner liner, the nylon wrap, and the outer liner, that adhesive breaks down and then allows the water, the next time it's fired up, the next time you put pressure to it, the nylon braid that adds the strength member to this is been impacted, and the water can blow through that. And it puts great big bubbles on the outside of the hose when you see that. Historically, that's from stretching out a piece of hose is what that's from, and getting those great big bubbles in there. A lot of times you'll take and cut a hose off and put a splicer on and get the bubble right behind it. That's usually because that hose has been stretched out pretty severely, and that bonding between the strength member of the nylon braid and the inner liner is broken down. Another question commonly gets asked, Mike, is, and I hear this all the time, how do we know when it's time to repair the hose?
That's a good question. So generally, when what we try to tell people, as soon as you see the nylon braiding showing through, it's time to replace that section of the hose. Now, if it's just a small section, you can actually cut that on both sides and just swedge that together and mend it, so you don't have to waste half of your roll of hose there. But if it's a long section, you want to find all the damage and make sure you remove all that damaged section, because it's never going to get better and it's only going to get worse. And if this thing blows up in the wrong time or the wrong, any time, it's never a good situation. So you can cut it in front and behind, and you can mend that together.
Take the bad section out. Then we can add a splicer in place of that bad section and continue to use the hose. Now, adding 2 end fittings in there rather than a splicer just makes a really long connection and hard to pull through. You compare the length, and we have you have to put a coupling in there yet too.
So you're almost a size and a half.
Yeah, and it really creates a long section. It's hard to get it through the tiger tail. It's hard to pull it in and out. It's hard to wrap up on the
hose reel.
On the hose reel. So, yeah.
This has been another episode of How and Why with DTI. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And tune in next time and let us expand your know-how.